Hi, my name is Madeline Brooks, and this was supposed to be a quiet celebration. My graduation dinner. Warm golden light spilling across a Seattle rooftop, crystal champagne flutes catching it just right, the soft clink of silverware, my parents laughing too loudly with strangers, as if we were the picture of a perfect family. I stood to greet my professor, Dr. Naomi, grateful she had come, and when I turned back, I saw my younger sister Kayla tilt a small vial over my glass. Just a second. A practice motion. A clear liquid disappearing into the bubbles. I didn't scream. I didn't confront her. My heart went cold instead, the way it does when something inside you finally understands the truth. My phone vibrated in my pocket. Janelle, don't drink. Switch glasses. I slid the base of my flute across the tablecloth, never lifting it, just enough to trade places. A tiny movement. A clean cut. Kayla stood and smiled. May I raise a toast for my sister? I smiled back. Then it began. Not all at once. It began with one sentence she didn't mean to say, and an entire rooftop falling silent. If you want to understand why my own sister did this, we have to go back 18 years. And before we start, tell me where you're watching from, and what time it is for you, so I know I'm not alone in this moment. We grew up in the suburbs of Tacoma, in a beige house that always looked tidy from the outside and quietly unbalanced on the inside. From as early as I can remember, I was the self-starter, the child who figured things out alone. I learned how to pack my own lunches, how to walk myself to the bus stop, how to stay quiet when adults talked. Kayla, on the other hand, was treated like something fragile that needed constant supervision. If I fell and scraped my knee, I was told to stop crying and be strong. If Kayla so much as frowned, my parents hovered like alarms had gone off. It wasn't spoken outright, but the roles were clear. I was capable, therefore I required less. She was delicate, therefore she deserved more. By middle school, the difference had become routine. I got my first part-time job shelving books at the local library when I was 15, saving for school supplies and clothes I didn't want to ask my parents for. Kayla got new outfits delivered to the house, boxes stacked by the door with her name written in looping cursive. When I mentioned applying for a small academic scholarship, my mother pulled me aside and whispered, "Don't make your father feel like he's not providing enough." I remember nodding, swallowing the excitement I felt, learning early that my success needed to be quiet so it wouldn't inconvenience anyone else. When Kayla cried because a classmate unfollowed her online, the entire household rearranged itself around her feelings. Dinner conversation stopped. Plans were canceled. Comfort was deployed like an emergency response. My father cared deeply about appearances, though he would have denied it if asked. He liked neighbors complimenting our lawn, liked teachers recognizing our last name, liked the idea of being seen as a successful man with a successful family. Kayla fit that narrative better than I did. She was photogenic, expressive, endlessly comfortable in front of a camera. When she started posting videos online in high school, my parents treated it like a business venture. They shared her posts with relatives, praised her confidence, laughed about how she's just a natural. I watched from the sidelines as my father proudly told coworkers, "My youngest is building a following," while my own achievements were filed away as expected outcomes, not worth lingering on. High school sharpened the contrast. I took advanced classes, stayed late for debate practice, and spent weekends working. Kayla cycled through hobbies, each one funded and celebrated. If she quit, it was because the environment didn't support her creativity. If I struggled, it was because I put too much pressure on myself. There was always a reason why she needed protection, and I needed to adapt. Over time, I learned the unspoken rule of our house. Harmony mattered more than fairness, and harmony was defined by Kayla's emotional state. The first time I truly understood how deeply ingrained this pattern was came the day I was accepted into a competitive master's program. I came home holding the acceptance email on my phone, my hands shaking with pride and disbelief. I waited until after dinner to say anything, rehearsing the words in my head, telling myself to sound casual so no one would feel threatened. My parents looked up, smiled, congratulated me. And then, my mother added, almost immediately, "Just be careful how excited you sound." Kayla's been feeling a little lost lately. We don't want her to feel left behind. That was the moment something shifted inside me. Not anger, exactly. More like a quiet realization that even my biggest milestones would always be framed around my sister's comfort. Kayla noticed it too, though she interpreted it differently. To her, my accomplishments weren't neutral, they were competition. She had a way of reframing my personality in public settings that always left me feeling slightly off balance. At family gatherings, she'd laugh and say, "Maddie's just intense. You know how she is." At school events, she'd tell my friends, "She's not stuck up, she's just very serious about herself." The words were light, playful, but the effect was sharp. I began to see how easily she could shape a narrative, how my parents never corrected her, never questioned why I was always being introduced as difficult, cold, or overly ambitious. By the time we were adults, the pattern no longer surprised me. I had internalized it. I chose my words carefully, minimized my needs, and learned how to be successful without taking up too much emotional space. Kayla, meanwhile, learned that attention could be summoned on demand. All she had to do was feel wronged. All she had to do was cry. That imbalance followed us into adulthood, into my graduation dinner, into the moment when I watched her tilt a vial over my champagne glass. What happened that night didn't come out of nowhere. It was the result of 18 years of being taught that my role was to adjust and her role was to be protected, no matter the cost. By the time I finished my last semester, my life had begun to move in a direction that no longer fit neatly into the old family hierarchy. 2 weeks before graduation, I received an offer from a cloud-based tech company in Seattle. It wasn't a brand-name giant, nothing flashy enough to impress strangers at dinner parties, but the role was real, the work was demanding, and the starting salary was more money than I had ever made in my life. I remember sitting alone in my car outside my apartment after reading the email, hands on the steering wheel, letting the reality settle in. For the first time, my future felt solid. Earned, mine. When I told my parents, my father nodded with approval and said, "See, this is what happens when you're responsible." Then, almost without missing a beat, he added, "Once you're settled, you'll be able to help out more around here." It wasn't framed as a question. It never was. In our family, progress came with an invoice. My mother chimed in gently, reminding me how much Kayla was still finding herself, how unstable the economy was, how family needed to support family. I agreed, the way I always had, even as something in my chest tightened. I was no longer just the capable one. I was becoming the resource. Kayla reacted differently. She congratulated me publicly, commenting under my graduation announcement with heart emojis and exaggerated praise. Privately, she grew restless. Her life, by contrast, was a carefully curated illusion. She talked about brand deals that never materialized, posted photos from borrowed locations, and financed her lifestyle through buy now pay later apps and maxed out credit cards. Packages arrived daily, even though she hadn't paid rent in years. My parents pretended not to notice the overdue notices tucked between glossy envelopes. It was easier to believe in Kayla's potential than to confront her reality. As my graduation dinner approached, her behavior shifted from passive resentment to something more territorial. She insisted on choosing the restaurant, pushing for a place that looked good on camera rather than one that felt meaningful to me. She argued about the seating arrangement, asking to sit at the center of the table, for balance, as if my achievement needed to be visually redistributed. When I mentioned inviting Janelle and Dr. Naomi, Kayla smiled tightly and said, "Sure, but make sure I'm in all the photos. People love sibling content." It was said lightly, but the message was clear. This wasn't just my night. It was an opportunity. The day before the dinner, she sent a message in the family group chat. "Tomorrow's such a big moment. I was thinking I could say a few words during the toast. Nothing long. It would be really special and great for memories. Maybe even viral." The word lingered on the screen longer than it should have. Viral. As if my graduation were a product launch, as if my years of work were a backdrop for her visibility. My parents responded immediately with encouragement, telling her what a lovely idea it was. No one asked how I felt. I stared at the message, thumb hovering over the screen, considering for a brief moment what it would be like to say no. Then I closed the app. That night, lying in bed, I understood something I hadn't fully articulated before. My success didn't inspire my sister. It threatened her. It disrupted the story our family had been telling for years. The one where Kayla was the star in waiting and I was the supporting structure. Graduation dinner wasn't just a celebration. It was a stage, and Kayla intended to stand at the center of it. By the time I fell asleep, I knew she wouldn't settle for sharing the spotlight. She would need to control it. The week leading up to my graduation dinner carried a strange, low-grade tension I couldn't quite name at first. It wasn't dramatic. Nothing overtly hostile happened. It was subtler than that, woven into casual conversations and offhand questions that, on their own, sounded harmless. One afternoon, as we sat at my parents' kitchen counter pretending to discuss menu options, Kayla tilted her head and asked, almost thoughtfully, whether I tended to get tipsy easily. She followed it with another question, just as casually, about whether I had any food allergies or sensitivities. She laughed when she asked, rolling her eyes as if she were just being silly. I laughed too, because that was my reflex. But later, alone in my car, the questions replayed in my head with an edge they hadn't had before. They weren't curious. They were specific. My mother added her own pressure in quieter ways. She called me several times that week with suggestions, each one framed as concern. She thought it would be nice if Kayla's boyfriend came, even though I'd met him only once and barely remembered his last name. She mentioned that Kayla had a few friends in the city who would love to celebrate with us, people who would bring energy to the night. When I hesitated, she sighed and reminded me how hard this year had been for Kayla, how important it was that she feel included. I suggested, again, that I wanted Janelle there and Dr. Naomi, because they had supported me through the program. My mother's tone cooled immediately. "This is a family dinner," she said. "Guests like that can make things awkward. Your family should come first." The irony wasn't lost on me, but I let it go, the way I always had. Janelle was the only person who noticed the shift without me having to explain it. We met for coffee 3 days before the dinner, and I mentioned Kayla's questions in passing, trying to sound unbothered. Janelle didn't laugh. She leaned back in her chair, studying my face the way she did when she was running risk assessments at work. Then she told me something that made my stomach tighten. Kayla, she said, had been posting stories about a new hack she'd discovered, something that helped people relax instantly, something natural but stronger than wine. The posts disappeared quickly, but Janelle had seen them. "It's probably nothing," she added carefully. "But with your sister, nothing is ever just nothing." That night, I lay awake longer than usual, staring at the ceiling of my apartment, replaying the week in fragments. The questions. The guest list manipulation. The insistence on a toast. The way Kayla had begun talking about the dinner like it was content, not a milestone. I told myself I was being paranoid. I didn't want to believe my own sister would deliberately hurt me. Still, a quiet voice inside me insisted that something wasn't right, that the pattern I'd lived with for 18 years was simply evolving into a new form. On the morning of the dinner, I made a small, deliberate choice. I placed my phone on the table and left the screen facing up. It went against my habit of keeping it tucked away during meals, but I wanted it visible, accessible. If something felt off, I wanted to see it immediately. It wasn't a grand plan, it was instinct. The same instinct that had taught me, years ago, how to navigate rooms where my comfort mattered less than someone else's mood. By the time we arrived at the restaurant, the unease had settled into something sharper. Kayla was animated, more so than usual, checking her reflection in every surface, adjusting the angle of the lighting, directing the server where to stand when pouring drinks. She hugged me with exaggerated enthusiasm, whispering how proud she was, how excited she was to celebrate me, her tone just a fraction too loud, too practiced. My parents watched approvingly, mistaking her performance for support. The rooftop looked exactly the way Kayla had promised it would. Seattle stretched out beneath us in layers of light and shadow, the bay reflecting the last traces of sunset, glass buildings catching gold at their edges. A long table had been set near the railing, candles flickering in low glass holders, their reflections trembling in the polished surface. Soft jazz floated through the air, the kind designed not to interrupt conversation but to suggest elegance without effort. It was beautiful in the way staged moments often are, carefully arranged, pleasing from a distance, and quietly demanding that everyone play their part. I was seated where Kayla had decided I should be. To my left was Dr. Naomi, my advisor, her posture relaxed, her presence grounding. Across from me sat my parents, positioned perfectly to survey the table, to receive congratulations, to look like proud architects of the moment. Kayla took the chair closest to me on my right, close enough that her knee brushed mine when she shifted, close enough that I could smell her perfume every time she leaned in. She smiled constantly, scanning the table, adjusting small details with quick, precise movements, like a director making last-minute notes before the curtain rises. The champagne arrived next, poured from a chilled bottle by a server who had clearly been briefed to move slowly and carefully. Identical crystal flutes were placed in front of each of us, their thin stems catching the candlelight, their bowls filling with pale gold and a steady rise of bubbles. There were no markings, no variations, nothing to distinguish one glass from another. Kayla watched closely as they were set down, nodding approvingly, her eyes flicking from the bottle to the table to her phone, which she had already propped against a water glass at just the right angle. "Okay," she said brightly, clapping her hands once. "Before anyone touches anything, Maddie, sit up a bit. Turn your shoulders toward the light. Yes, like that." She lifted her phone. "This angle is perfect. Smile like you just found out something amazing." I complied, because that was easier than explaining that I didn't want to be staged. She snapped several photos, checked them, frowned, then tried again. "Hold on, let me get one with Dr. Naomi too. People love mentor moments." Dr. Naomi smiled politely, unaware of the choreography unfolding around her. My parents looked pleased, my mother smoothing her napkin, my father leaning back in his chair with the satisfied expression he wore when things appeared to be going well. Kayla moved seamlessly between roles, sister, hostess, content creator, never pausing long enough for anyone to question her authority over the moment. She narrated everything aloud, suggesting captions, laughing at her own jokes, reminding us to wait before sipping so she could capture the first toast energy. Anders and Haiming. At one point, Dr. Naomi leaned toward me and said how proud she was, how she'd known from the start that I would do well in the program. The words grounded me, pulled me briefly out of the performance. I turned fully toward her, wanting to respond with the attention she deserved, wanting to thank her properly for the late emails and honest feedback and belief she'd shown me when I doubted myself. I didn't notice Kayla move at first. I only sensed it, a shift in the air beside me. When I turned back toward the table, my eyes caught the motion immediately. Kayla's hand hovered over my champagne flute, her body angled so her shoulder blocked the view from across the table. Between her fingers was a small vial, no bigger than a lip gloss tube, translucent and nearly invisible against the lights. She tilted it with practiced ease. A clear liquid slipped out, thin and fast, vanishing into the champagne as if it had always belonged there. The bubbles swallowed it whole. No splash, no residue. Nothing that would have drawn attention if you weren't looking directly at it. I was looking directly at it. Time didn't slow the way people say it does in moments like that. If anything, it sharpened. Every detail fixed itself in my mind with startling clarity: the faint click of the vial against her ring, the way her wrist rotated smoothly, the satisfied microsmile that flickered across her face before she straightened. My body reacted before my emotions did. My heart dropped hard, cold spreading through my chest, not panic but recognition. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't carelessness. It was deliberate. Kayla withdrew her hand and picked up her phone as if nothing had happened, angling it toward the skyline. "Okay. Now don't touch anything yet," she said lightly. "I want to get a video of the city first." My parents nodded along. Dr. Naomi was mid-sentence, unaware. The server had already moved away. No one else had seen it. Or, if they had, they hadn't understood what it was. I didn't say a word. I didn't gasp or accuse. Or knock the glass away. Years of learning how to stay composed kicked in, the same instinct that had taught me how to survive family dinners and quiet dismissals. My phone vibrated against the table where I'd left it, screen facing up. The notification lit the edge of my vision. I glanced down just long enough to read the message. Don't drink. Switch glasses. Janelle's name sat above the words, steady and certain. Janelle was seated diagonally across from me, far enough away to look uninvolved, close enough to see what others missed. She had always been like that, quietly observant, trained by years of compliance work to notice patterns, hands, timing. While everyone else watched Kayla perform, Janelle watched her wrists. Later, she would tell me that what caught her attention wasn't just the vial itself, but how smooth the motion was. Too smooth. Not the clumsy curiosity of someone fiddling with a drink, but the practiced ease of someone who had rehearsed it. She saw the angle of Kayla's shoulder, the way her body blocked the table from view, the fraction of a second it took for the liquid to disappear. By the time my phone vibrated, Janelle wasn't guessing. She was confirming. Don't drink, switch glasses. She's going to force a toast. I read the message once. Then again. Not because I didn't understand it, but because I needed my breathing to stay even. I lifted my eyes slowly, letting my face settle into something neutral, something familiar. Years of presentations, negotiations, and rooms where my credibility had been questioned had taught me how to control my expression. I knew how to look attentive while my mind raced. I knew how to smile, without revealing anything underneath. So I smiled. I nodded as if I were listening to Kayla describe a filter she liked. I laughed softly at something my father said. Inside, every sense sharpened. Kayla was already setting the stage. She talked about memories, about how long she'd been waiting for this moment, about how proud she was. She kept glancing at the glasses, checking their placement, her fingers hovering just a little too close whenever she gestured. She wanted control. She wanted to choreograph not just the toast, but the reaction. I could feel it in the way she leaned toward me, in the way her knee pressed into mine again, grounding me in place. The old version of me would have frozen there, trapped between politeness and fear. The version of me sitting at that table understood something new. Silence was no longer neutral. Silence was consent. I needed a distraction. Not a dramatic one, something ordinary enough that no one would remember it later. The opportunity came from the left, where Dr. Naomi excused herself to use the restroom, standing and pushing her chair back with an apologetic smile. Almost simultaneously, a server approached the table to ask about dessert preferences, interrupting Kayla mid-sentence. She turned, eager to manage that too, launching into a list of options she'd already researched. In that brief window, her attention shifted. Her body angled away. Her eyes left the glasses. I moved. The action itself was almost imperceptible. I didn't lift either flute. I didn't rush. I slid the base of my glass across the tablecloth, the fabric absorbing the movement, keeping the liquid steady. At the same time, I drew the other glass toward me, reversing their positions in a mirrored motion that looked, from a distance, like nothing at all. I rotated the rim slightly, turning the faint lipstick mark Kayla had left earlier away from her line of sight. The entire exchange took less than a second. It felt longer only because my pulse was loud in my ears. When the glasses settled, they looked exactly as they had before. Identical stems, identical bubbles, identical promise. I rested my hand around the clean glass and waited. Kayla turned back, resuming her place beside me without hesitation. She scanned the table once, quickly, her confidence doing the work her caution should have. She smiled, satisfied. Whatever she had planned, she believed it was still intact. In that moment, I understood something that had taken me years to learn. I wasn't doing this to punish her. I wasn't doing it to teach her a lesson or expose her for sport. I was doing it because for 18 years, I had been trained to absorb discomfort quietly, to protect the equilibrium of a family that never protected me. I was doing it because if I stayed silent again, if I swallowed this too, it wouldn't end here. It would follow me into my job, my relationships, my future. It would teach her, once more, that she could cross any line without consequence. The music softened almost imperceptibly, the way it does when a room is being prepared to listen. One of the restaurant staff stepped forward with a practiced smile and tapped the side of a glass, thanking everyone for coming, congratulating me on my graduation, and inviting my sister to say a few words. Kayla didn't look surprised. She looked ready. She stood smoothly, champagne flute already in hand, her posture confident. Her smile wide enough to sell sincerity to anyone who didn't know her well. Chairs shifted. Conversations trailed off. Phones were discreetly angled upward. This, she knew, was her moment. She began the way she always did, with warmth carefully calibrated for an audience. She talked about growing up together, about how she had watched me study late into the night, about how proud she was of her big sister. Her voice carried easily over the rooftop, light and affectionate. Heads nodded. My parents smiled across the table, visibly relieved, pleased that everything appeared to be unfolding the way they had imagined. I sat still, my hands relaxed around the stem of my glass, my expression open, attentive, neutral. I had learned long ago that the most dangerous thing you can do to someone who expects a reaction is deny them one. Then the tone shifted, subtly at first, the way it always did with Kayla. Maddie has always been driven, she said, pausing just long enough to let the word land. She likes things a certain way, perfect, even. A few polite laughs rippled through the table. She smiled as if she were in on a joke the rest of the room didn't fully understand. Sometimes I think she tries so hard to look like she has it all together. She tilted her head toward me, eyes glinting. But I guess tonight proves it paid off. You finally have something to show for it. My jaw tightened for a fraction of a second before I smoothed it away. I kept my gaze on her, calm, unflinching. She went on, buoyed by the attention, by the sound of her own voice amplified and validated. She spoke about luck, about timing, about how supportive our parents had been. Not everyone gets these kinds of opportunities, she said, lifting her glass slightly. It really helps when you have people backing you. The implication was clear enough to sting without being explicit. My parents nodded again, my mother dabbing at her eyes as if overcome with pride. I said nothing, I smiled. Kayla raised her flute higher. So let's all drink to Maddie, she said brightly, to her achievements, and to everything she's going to do next. She turned the glass toward her lips and took a long, deliberate sip, holding it there for a beat longer than necessary, making a show of it. The gesture was unmistakable. She was modeling what she expected me to do. I lifted my own glass, mirrored her movement, and took a small, careful sip. The champagne tasted exactly as it should dry, crisp, unremarkable. I set the glass back down and waited. At first, nothing happened. Kayla continued speaking, basking in the room's attention, riding the momentum of applause and approval. But as the seconds stretched into minutes, I noticed the smallest changes. The way her words began to slow, the way she blinked a little longer than usual. She laughed at her own joke and then stopped abruptly, as if she'd forgotten where she was going with it. She adjusted her stance, shifting her weight from one foot to the other, her heels scraping softly against the floor. She recovered quickly, forcing a bright smile, pushing through the moment with practiced ease. Sorry, she said lightly, waving a hand. Guess I'm more emotional than I thought. A few people chuckled. She pressed on, determined not to lose control. But her voice had changed. The crisp edges were gone, replaced by something thicker, heavier. Her words began to blur together, consonants softening, vowels stretching. She glanced down at her glass, then back up at the table, confusion flickering across her face before she smoothed it away. I watched without moving. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel relieved. What I felt was an eerie stillness, the kind that settles in just before a truth surfaces. Kayla took another half step closer to the table, bracing herself with her free hand. Her smile wavered. Wow, she said, laughing again, too loudly this time. That champagne hits fast, huh? She brought the microphone closer to her mouth, as if proximity might steady her. The rooftop had grown quiet. Not the attentive quiet from before, but a different kind, edged with uncertainty. Dr. Naomi, who had returned to her seat moments earlier, was watching Kayla intently now, her expression no longer polite but sharp, evaluative. Janelle's posture had changed too. She leaned forward slightly, one hand already hovering near her phone. Kayla tried to continue, but the words slipped sideways. She shook her head, frowning. Then laughed again, the sound thin. "This is so weird," she said. "I swear I—" She stopped, brow furrowing, eyes flicking from my face to the glass in her hand. I think I might have grabbed the wrong one. There was a beat of silence, so complete it felt physical. She lifted the flute slightly, turning it as if inspecting it for answers. "You know," she added, her tone attempting humor. The one I set up for you." The words hung in the air, unfinished but unmistakable. A murmur rippled through the table, sharp and immediate. My mother's smile froze. My father leaned forward, his expression tightening. "Doctor." Naomi's gaze locked onto Kayla, her head tilting just enough to signal concern, recognition, something clicking into place. Across from me, Janelle's phone was already in her hand, the recording icon glowing red. Kayla seemed to realize, a second too late, that she had said something she couldn't pull back. Her eyes widened, then narrowed, panic bleeding through the haze. "I mean," she started, laughing weakly, trying to wave it off. "I just meant, you know, the toast order. I'm so out of it." She stumbled slightly, catching herself on the edge of the table, her knuckles whitening as she gripped the wood. No one laughed this time. The room felt suspended, every person suddenly aware that they were witnessing something unscripted, something that hadn't been meant for public consumption. I stayed where I was, my hands folded neatly in my lap, my face composed. I didn't need to say anything. Kayla had done it for me. Whatever she had intended to keep hidden had surfaced on its own, carried out into the open by her own mouth, amplified by a microphone she had been so eager to hold. "Doctor." Naomi broke the silence first, her voice calm but firm. "Kayla," she said, "what did you mean by that?" The question was simple, direct, impossible to deflect without answering something else in its place. Kayla opened her mouth, closed it again, swayed slightly as if the ground beneath her had shifted. She looked at my parents, searching for rescue, but they were staring back at her, stunned, unprepared. I felt Janelle's gaze flick toward me, quick and steady, as if to confirm that I was all right. I gave her the smallest nod. My heart was pounding now, not with fear, but with the weight of inevitability. The first crack had formed. The story Kayla had tried to control was no longer hers to manage. And as the silence stretched, thick and unforgiving, I knew this was only the beginning. Dr. Naomi broke the silence first, her voice calm but firm. "Kayla," she said, "what did you mean by that?" The question was simple, direct, impossible to deflect without answering something else in its place. Kayla opened her mouth, closed it again, swayed slightly as if the ground beneath her had shifted. She looked at my parents, searching for rescue, but they were staring back at her, stunned, unprepared. I felt Janelle's gaze flick toward me, quick and steady, as if to confirm that I was all right. I gave her the smallest nod. My heart was pounding now, not with fear, but with the weight of inevitability. The first crack had formed. The story Kayla had tried to control was no longer hers to manage. And as the silence stretched, thick and unforgiving, I knew this was only the beginning. For a few seconds after Dr. Naomi's question, no one moved. Kayla stood there with the microphone still in her hand, her mouth slightly open, eyes unfocused, as if she were trying to piece together what she had just said, and why the room no longer felt friendly. Then her face drained of color. She swallowed hard, once, twice, and reached for the table again, this time missing the edge by an inch. The microphone clattered against the wood as she bent forward abruptly, a sharp, wet sound following as she retched. Gasps rippled through the rooftop. Someone pushed their chair back too fast. A server hurried forward, then froze, unsure whether to intervene or wait for direction. The manager was called within seconds. I saw him approach from the far end of the rooftop, his expression already shifting from professional calm to alert concern as he took in the scene. A young woman unsteady on her feet, a microphone lying on the table, guests staring in stunned silence. Kayla straightened briefly, waving a hand as if to say she was fine, but her body betrayed her. She swayed again, pressing her palm to her mouth, her breathing uneven. I just need some water, she slurred, forcing a laugh that didn't land. Guess I didn't eat enough today. No one laughed with her. My mother was the first to find her voice, and she used it the way she always had, like a weapon pointed in the wrong direction. She turned on me, eyes blazing, her face tight with accusation. What did you do to your sister? She demanded, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. My father followed immediately, pushing his chair back, his tone sharp and incredulous. Maddie, this is not funny. What did you put in her drink? Their words hit the air hard, as if saying them out loud could make them true. Something inside me finally shifted. I stood up slowly, the scrape of my chair against the floor cutting through the noise. For the first time that night, I didn't try to soften myself, didn't lower my voice to keep the peace. I didn't do anything, I said, clearly, evenly. I just didn't drink my glass. The words were simple, almost quiet, but they landed with more force than I expected. My parents stared at me, stunned, as if the concept itself were incomprehensible. Not drink my glass. Not comply, not play along. Kayla heard it too. Her head snapped toward me, panic flashing across her face. It was an accident, she said quickly, her words tangling over each other. I must have mixed things up. You know how these tables get crowded. It's just champagne. She laughed again, a brittle sound, then gagged, doubling over as another wave of nausea hit. The manager stepped closer now, signaling to a server to call for medical assistance. A few guests had started whispering, the mood shifting decisively from celebration to crisis. Janelle moved before anyone else could redirect the moment. She stood and addressed the manager directly, her voice calm, precise, impossible to ignore. Please don't clear the table, she said, and don't remove the champagne bottle. She gestured to the flutes. There may be an issue with one of the drinks. You should also preserve any security footage covering this area. The manager blinked, then nodded, professionalism taking over as he assessed the liability unfolding in front of him. We do have overhead cameras, he confirmed. I'll make sure everything is secured. My mother's head whipped toward Janelle. What are you implying? She snapped. Janelle didn't answer her. She didn't need to. The implication was already settling into the room, heavy and unavoidable. Kayla slid into a chair, her legs giving out beneath her, her hands trembling now as she tried to steady herself. A server brought water, another brought a cloth, but it was clear this wasn't something a glass of ice could fix. When the paramedics arrived, their presence was unmistakable, the bright medical bag and clipped questions cutting through the last remnants of denial. Have you consumed any substances tonight, besides alcohol? One of them asked, kneeling in front of Kayla, checking her pupils. Kayla shook her head too quickly, then stopped, confusion clouding her expression. No, she said, then hesitated. I mean just champagne. Her eyes flicked to my parents. Then to me, then away again. Nothing else, she added, less convincingly this time. The paramedic exchanged a look with his partner and continued the assessment, asking about dizziness, nausea, blurred vision. Kayla answered inconsistently, her story shifting even as she tried to keep it together. Doctor. Naomi had been silent until then, watching the scene unfold with the focus of someone used to evaluating evidence rather than emotion. When she spoke, the effect was immediate. I was present when Kayla made her toast, she said, her voice steady, carrying just enough authority to still the murmurs around us. I heard her say she might have taken the wrong glass. Specifically, the one she had prepared for her sister. She looked directly at the paramedic, then at the manager. That is not a joke. That is not something someone says by accident. The words landed like a gavel. My father's face went pale. My mother's mouth opened, then closed again, soundless. Kayla stared at Dr. Naomi, her eyes wide, fear cutting through the haze. I didn't mean it like that, she whispered, but there was no conviction left in her voice. The paramedics paused, one of them gently taking Kayla's wrist to check her pulse again, the other making a note. The manager cleared his throat and stepped aside to make a call, his posture rigid with concern. The rooftop had fully turned against the illusion my family had been maintaining. Guests were no longer pretending not to listen. Phones were no longer discreet. Conversations had stopped entirely, replaced by the collective awareness that something serious had just happened. My parents stood frozen, caught between their instinct to protect Kayla and the reality that protection might no longer be possible. For once, they didn't know which direction to push. I felt strangely calm. The adrenaline had burned off, leaving behind a clarity I had never experienced so fully. I didn't feel the need to explain myself or defend my choices. The facts were unfolding on their own, guided by people who had no emotional investment in preserving our family's narrative. That mattered more than anything I could have said. As the paramedics prepared to escort Kayla for further evaluation, my mother finally found her voice again. She lunged toward me, her words sharp and desperate. "How could you do this to your own sister?" she cried. "Family doesn't treat each other like this." Her voice cracked on the last word, drawing the attention of everyone still watching. I picked up my coat from the back of my chair and slid it on, my movements deliberate, unhurried. "Family also doesn't do what she did," I said quietly. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't look back at Kayla. There was nothing left to say. The manager nodded at me as I passed, his expression apologetic, respectful. Janelle caught my eye and gave a small, steady nod, her phone still recording, her presence a silent promise that I wasn't imagining any of this. Behind me, my mother's voice rose again, shrill now, edged with panic. "You're tearing this family apart," she screamed. "After everything we've done for you." I didn't turn around. I walked toward the elevator, the city lights blurring briefly as the doors slid shut. As the rooftop disappeared from view, I felt the weight of years lift from my shoulders, replaced by something unfamiliar and fragile. Relief. Whatever happened next, I knew one thing with certainty. I was not going back. I slept less than 2 hours that night. Not because I was replaying the scene on the rooftop, but because my phone would not stop lighting up. By morning, the screen was a wall of missed calls and unread messages, my parents' names stacked one after another like an accusation. When I finally opened the thread, the tone was already familiar. My mother wrote first, insisting Kayla had just been stressed, that she hadn't eaten properly, that the champagne must have been stronger than expected. My father followed with longer messages, alternating between anger and appeal. "Don't make this bigger than it needs to be. Families handle things privately. You know how fragile your sister is." Each message carried the same unspoken demand I had lived with my entire life. "Fix this, quietly, for everyone else's sake." Janelle came over that afternoon with coffee and a legal pad. She didn't ask how I was feeling. She asked what I remembered, what time things happened, who stood where, who heard what. It was grounding, the shift from emotion to process. She helped me save every message from my parents and Kayla, screenshotting them, labeling dates and times. She contacted the restaurant manager, who confirmed there was an incident report on file and that security footage from the rooftop cameras had been preserved. He sounded relieved, almost grateful, that someone was taking the situation seriously. "We don't want liability issues," he said carefully. "But we also don't want anyone getting hurt." I understood what he meant. This was no longer a family matter, it was a record. Kayla tried a different approach. Her messages came later, softer at first, full of confusion and regret. She said she didn't remember exactly what she'd said, that things had gotten blown out of proportion, that she felt humiliated. Then the tone shifted. She suggested we issue a joint statement, something vague about a misunderstanding, stress, emotions running high. My parents echoed it within minutes, urging me to post on social media, to reassure people nothing was wrong. "Your sister's reputation is on the line," my mother wrote. "Think about how this looks." It struck me then how quickly concern for my safety had been replaced by concern for appearances. I didn't respond. Instead, with Janelle's guidance, I filed a police report, detailing what I had witnessed and what Kayla had said. It felt surreal sitting in a small, fluorescent-lit office, recounting events that had unfolded beneath candlelight and city views. The officer listened carefully, asked clarifying questions, and nodded when I mentioned the recording and the camera footage. He didn't promise outcomes. He didn't dramatize it. He treated it like what it was, a serious allegation that required documentation. After that, I filed for a temporary restraining order. It wasn't dramatic or vengeful. It was precaution. It was me acknowledging, for the first time, that what had happened crossed a line I could not pretend away. My parents reacted exactly as I expected. The calls resumed, angrier now, sharper. My father accused me of ruining Kayla's future, of overreacting, of betraying my own blood. My mother cried into voicemail, saying she didn't recognize me anymore, that I had changed. I listened to one message all the way through, standing in my kitchen, the city humming faintly outside the window. When it ended, I finally typed a reply. Just one sentence. My future is also a future. And I'm done sacrificing it. I hit send, then blocked both numbers. The days that followed were quiet in a way I wasn't used to. Without the constant pull of family drama, there was space, uncomfortable at first, then relieving. I met with a therapist for the first time, sitting on a gray couch and explaining patterns I'd never named aloud. She didn't interrupt. She didn't minimize. She simply nodded and said, "It sounds like you've been carrying responsibility that was never yours." The words settled somewhere deep, loosening something I hadn't realized was clenched. News travels quickly in families like mine, even when no one says anything directly. Relatives reached out cautiously, asking if I was okay, hinting that things were tense. I answered honestly, without detail. I didn't defend myself, I didn't explain. I let the record speak for itself. Janelle kept everything organized, reminding me that clarity was my ally. Every text, every call, every attempt to pressure me into silence became part of the pattern, not a new surprise. One evening, a week after the dinner, I stood on my balcony watching the sun sink behind the skyline. My phone buzzed once more with an unknown number. I didn't answer it. I didn't need to. For the first time, I understood that stepping away wasn't abandonment. It was self-preservation. The image my family had worked so hard to maintain had cracked, not because I exposed it, but because it could no longer contain the truth. And in that collapse, something else began to take shape. A life not built around managing someone else's comfort, but around protecting my own. The message asking to meet came 3 weeks later, delivered through my grandmother Helen because my parents knew I wouldn't answer them directly. She left a voicemail that was careful and gentle, the way she had always spoken to me, saying they wanted to talk, that everyone was hurting, that maybe if we sat down together things could finally calm. I agreed, not because I believed in reconciliation, but because I wanted the ending to be clean. My grandmother's house was neutral ground, a small single-story place in Tacoma with a creaky porch and furniture that hadn't changed in decades. It was the one place where family performances tended to falter because Helen had never cared much for them. I arrived alone, carrying a slim folder tucked under my arm. My parents were already there, sitting stiffly on opposite ends of the couch like they were preparing for court rather than conversation. Kayla sat beside my mother, pale, subdued, wrapped in a cardigan that made her look smaller than I remembered. The air felt thick the moment I stepped inside. My mother's eyes filled immediately, her face collapsing into practiced sorrow. My father crossed his arms, jaw tight, already bracing for what he believed would be an attack. No one offered me a hug. That, more than anything, told me how this meeting would go. My mother spoke first, voice trembling. She said she hadn't slept, that the family was falling apart, that Kayla was terrified of what might happen next. She said my grandmother didn't deserve to see her family like this. Then the accusations crept in, woven between tears. I was being extreme. I was embarrassing everyone. I was punishing Kayla instead of protecting her. My father followed, his tone sharper, more direct. He said I'd always been stubborn, that I took things too far, that no one would blame me for asking Kayla to apologize, but that involving authorities was unforgivable. He said the words that had defined my childhood, "You're smarter than this. You should know better." I let them finish. I didn't interrupt. When there was finally a pause, I placed the folder on the coffee table and opened it. One by one, I laid everything out. Printed screenshots of messages from Kayla and my parents, time-stamped. The restaurant's written confirmation that footage existed. The incident report, an email from Dr. Naomi stating exactly what she had heard during the toast, clear and unambiguous. A summary from the medical evaluation that night. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't editorialize. I let the facts speak, the way Janelle had taught me to. The room grew quieter with each page. Kayla shifted beside my mother, her breathing shallow now, her eyes darting between the papers and my face. When she finally spoke, her voice was small, almost childlike. She said she never meant for things to go that far. She said she just wanted to take me down a notch, that I'd been acting distant, above everyone. She looked at me directly then, frustration bleeding through the fear. I just wanted you to stop being so perfect, she said. I didn't think it would turn into all this. Ardon is Spain. I met her gaze steadily. You wanted me to lose control in front of people who respect me, I said. You wanted me to look unstable so you wouldn't have to feel smaller. The words landed hard, and for once, no one rushed in to soften them. My parents looked stunned, as if hearing the truth framed that way cracked something they had been holding together with denial. I continued before they could regroup. I told them my boundaries, clearly, without apology. There would be no money, no contact, no access to any future children I might have. There would be no forgiveness offered to make things easier for them. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a mistake born of stress. It was intent. It was harm. I told them I was done carrying responsibility for Kayla's feelings and for the family's image. My voice didn't shake. I had rehearsed these words in therapy, in long walks, in the quiet moments when I finally let myself be honest. My father exploded then, standing abruptly, accusing me of destroying my sister's life, of choosing strangers over blood. He said I was cold, ungrateful, selfish. My mother cried harder, pleading with me to reconsider, to think of the years we'd spent together, to be the bigger person just one more time. I listened, and for the first time, I didn't feel pulled back into the old gravity of it all. Their pain was real, but it was not my responsibility to fix. My grandmother, who had been silent until then, finally spoke. Her voice was steady, tired, and utterly devoid of performance. Enough, she said. Everyone froze. She looked at my parents, then at Kayla, then at me. The best-behaved child in this family was made to grow up too fast, she said quietly. And you all called it strength. The words cut deeper than anything I could have said myself. No one argued with her. No one dared. I stood, closed the folder, and picked up my coat. I told my grandmother, I loved her, that I was grateful for her honesty. Then I looked at my parents one last time and said, this is where it ends. I didn't wait for a response. I walked to the door, stepped out into the cool air, and closed it behind me. In my car, hands steady on the wheel, I blocked the remaining numbers. I didn't look back at the house. I didn't need to. The chapter had closed, not with forgiveness, but with clarity. 12 to 18 months passed without any dramatic turning points, and that was the point. Healing didn't arrive as a single moment of triumph or closure. It came quietly, in increments so small I didn't notice them until I looked back. I moved into a new apartment on the east side of Seattle, closer to Bellevue, a place with large windows and a view of the water that caught the morning light. It wasn't extravagant, but it was mine. I chose the furniture myself. I chose silence when I needed it. I chose rest without guilt. For the first time in my adult life, my home didn't feel like a staging area for someone else's expectations. Therapy became part of my routine, not as a crisis response, but as maintenance. Once a week, I sat across from someone who helped me untangle the instincts that had once kept me safe and were now holding me back. We talked about responsibility, about how being the strong one in a family often meant being the most neglected. We talked about grief too, because cutting off a family doesn't mean you stop loving them, only that you stop allowing love to be used as leverage. I learned to recognize the physical signs of stress in my body, the way my shoulders tightened when I anticipated conflict that no longer existed. Over time, those signals softened. I slept better. I breathed more deeply. I laughed more easily. At work, things shifted in ways I hadn't expected. Without the constant emotional drain of managing family dynamics, I had more focus, more clarity. I took on projects I might have once avoided, trusting my instincts instead of second-guessing them. A year after I started, my manager offered me a promotion, citing not just my performance but my ability to lead calmly under pressure. Around the same time, I volunteered to mentor a small group of women entering the tech field, students who reminded me of myself years earlier, bright and uncertain, unsure how much space they were allowed to take up. Watching them grow, watching their confidence bloom when someone simply believed them, felt quietly redemptive. My social circle changed too, organically, without effort. I built what people like to call a chosen family, though to me it felt less like replacement and more like alignment. Friends who respected boundaries without questioning them. Dinners where no one monitored my tone or minimized my achievements. Weekend hikes, shared meals, conversations that didn't require translation. Janelle remained a constant. Her presence steady, her loyalty never loud but always visible. Dr. Naomi stayed in touch as well, sending the occasional note, celebrating milestones, reminding me that mentorship doesn't end when a program does. I heard about Kayla through distant channels, the way news travels when you've stepped out of the center of a story. I didn't seek updates, and I didn't celebrate her struggles when they inevitably surfaced. What I felt wasn't satisfaction or vindication. It was distance. Relief. The kind that comes when you realize someone else's chaos no longer has access to your nervous system. I didn't wish her harm. I simply stopped absorbing the consequences of her choices. My parents tried a few times to re-enter my life through intermediaries. A cousin. A family friend. Even my grandmother, careful not to pressure me, passed along messages framed as concern. They wanted to talk. They wanted to clear the air. They wanted to move on. I declined each time, politely, consistently, without explanation. Boundaries. I had learned. Don't need justification. They only need enforcement. With every refusal, the guilt lessened, replaced by a steady confidence that I was doing what was necessary, not what was expected. One evening, nearly a year and a half after the graduation dinner, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, rain tapping softly against the windows. I had been thinking about the story, not with anger, but with distance, the way you revisit something once it no longer owns you. I wrote a short post, anonymous, honest, and unadorned. I lost a family to save my mental health. It hurt. It still does sometimes. But I am alive in a way I wasn't before. I didn't include names or details. I didn't need to. The truth stood on its own. The response surprised me. Messages poured in from people who recognized themselves in the words, who had been cast as caretakers, mediators, emotional shock absorbers in their own families. Some thanked me. Some argued. Some asked how I found the courage to walk away. I didn't reply to all of them, but I read every message carefully. There was a strange comfort in knowing that my story wasn't unique, that the pain I had once thought was personal failure was, in fact, a pattern many understood too well. Looking back now, I can say this with clarity: I didn't win. I didn't defeat anyone. I didn't orchestrate some perfect reversal. What I did was stop participating in a system that required my suffering to function. I chose myself not out of spite, but out of necessity. And that choice changed everything. There are people who will call you family only as long as you accept the role they've written for you. The moment you step outside it, they will accuse you of betrayal. Let them. Loyalty that demands silence in the face of harm is not love. Boundaries are not cruelty, they are self-rescue. And you don't need forgiveness to be free. You only need the courage to stop returning to places that hurt you. If any part of this story sounds familiar, if you've ever been made responsible for someone else's emotions at the expense of your own well-being, know this: choosing yourself is not abandonment, it's survival. And if you feel comfortable, leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Or simply write, "I choose me." You're not as alone as you think.